Well, welcome, folks. We're just going to give people a few more minutes to pop on in. And then we'll get started. Good morning, Sandy. Yeah, we're just going to give folks a couple more minutes to pop on in, and then we'll get started. Good morning, Valerie.
Good morning.
You know, watching people pop in on these video calls always reminds me a bit of, if anyone's old enough to remember Romper Room, where, you know, looked in the mirror and said, I see you. And we are recording today's call, so if you'd rather not show up on the video, that's fine. Just keep your video off and your names show up. So if you don't want your name on the video, just change your name to something innocuous, and that should keep you anonymous throughout the call. All right, I think we'll get started while people are still on their way in. Welcome, everybody. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we gather for KM in the AM today on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We broadcast from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and we honor our ancestors, keepers of this land, and recognize that meaningful knowledge exchange must be rooted in respect, reciprocity, and responsibility. Just a second, someone else is popping in. Excellent. We also recognize that the land as our mother, the earth, as part of our shared commitment with the University of Saskatchewan, we honor and support the Indigenous peoples, cultures, values, and languages that belong to Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. We invite each of you to acknowledge where you are joining us from in the chat. And you can go ahead and do that now. Well, welcome to KM in the AM. KM in the AM, if you're not familiar, is a Saskatchewan-based community of practice for people who care about knowledge mobilization, research communication, and creating real-world impact. This year marks our 10th anniversary, and we're celebrating with a special series of presentations featuring some of the most thoughtful voices across Canada. This anniversary series is made possible through the generous support of the Saskatchewan Network Environment for Indigenous Health Research, NEAR, and the University of Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan NEAR strengthens Métis and First Nations health research, training, and knowledge mobilization across the province. There are two networks, a national and a Saskatchewan network, alongside communities and researchers and students, support self-determined Indigenous health research grounded in First Nations, Métis, and other Indigenous knowledges and priorities. We are grateful for their leadership and their continued support of KM in the AM. Today, we are pleased to welcome Nicole Sarauer, MLA for Regina Douglas Park. Nicole has served as the opposition House Leader and as the Shadow Minister for Justice and Attorney General and Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety. Born and raised in Regina, Saskatchewan, Nicole studied at the University of Regina and the University of Saskatchewan, where she earned her doctorate in law with honors in 2009. I hope I got that year right, Nicole. Nicole was a lawyer in Regina who deeply valued access to justice. This commitment was demonstrated through her work at a provincial charity where she provided free legal representation to individuals facing financial hardship. She was elected as a trustee of the Regina Catholic School Board, in 2012, and her community service extends to organizations such as Regina Sexual Assault Center, Amnesty International, and YWCA Big Sisters program. Nicole brings a deep knowledge of Saskatchewan's legal, political, and community landscape. Her advocacy for justice, fairness, and public safety continues to make an impact at the provincial level and within local communities. let's give a warm welcome. KM in the AM, welcome to Nicole. Nicole, I'm going to hand it over to you. And I've also made you co-presenters, so you have full control here. So take it away, Nicole.
Great, thanks, Bonnie, and thank you so much for the generous offer to join with you to chat with your group this morning. First of all, disclosure, I had to drive up from Regina to Saskatoon this morning, so I'm taking this meeting virtually in a coffee shop, Five Corners, which I didn't realize is no longer Broadway Roastery. I don't know when that change happened, but I'm feeling a little old, realizing that name has changed. But if you hear some noise in the background, that's just because I'm at a coffee shop, and I do very much apologize if that's distracting for anybody. Bonnie and I had the opportunity to meet. I think we chatted after another talk that I gave, and through the conversation that we had subsequent to that talk, we had a great conversation about the work that we've been doing as an organization, reaching out and connecting with stakeholders throughout the province, and in particular in areas of the province where we have not been present in a while. And I think Bonnie thought that would be a good conversation for me to bring to this wider audience. Just so that you all know, and a quick path of where we're going. I'm just going to talk for a bit, and I'd be happy to take questions at the end if there are any. But I think I'll talk a little bit about my experience connecting with stakeholders more broadly, and in particular connecting with stakeholders in areas and on issues that I'm particularly not necessarily, that I don't consider my home base, I would say. So that can apply to rural Saskatchewan for some, and it can mean other things for others. And then I will talk a little bit about connecting with policymakers or political leaders, and how best, as I know many of you are researchers and writers in that regard, it can take your ideas and the work that you've done, your research, how you can best connect with us, I suppose, as folks in the world of politics. I don't think I'm going to be talking for the full 90 minutes. It's probably going to be closer to like 20 or 30. So there'll be lots of time for questions at the end. Don't feel like you won't have time if you do have lots of questions. I'm also very easily available outside of this. So if you have questions for me, but aren't comfortable asking them in the group setting, I will share my direct email after this in the chat, or Bonnie can if she wants. She's got my direct email as well, and feel free to reach out to me anytime on anything, really. So just a little brief summary of who I am. I know Bonnie gave a very generous summation of my professional life, but just so you know, I was elected in 2016. I'm just serving the beginning of my third term. I serve as the MLA for Regina Douglas Park. I got involved in this work through the advocacy work that I did prior to politics. So I was working in law, as Bonnie had mentioned. Okay, good. I'm glad to hear that the cafe name change was only a few months ago. I feel a little bit better about that then. Sorry. So I was working for a legal services charity prior to politics. I did that work for about 5 years, called Pro Bono Law Saskatchewan. The work that we did was twofold, I would say. We did some systemic advocacy work. So I did a lot of networking and liaising with the Ministry of Justice internally in advocating for changes that could better serve the clients that we were seeing, those who weren't able to qualify for legal aid and weren't able to afford lawyers. So those who fell through the cracks in the justice system and weren't being serviced accordingly. And then we also had to do a lot of outreach work in the public with lawyers, because we had 10 at that time free legal clinics that were staffed in person by volunteer lawyers who were giving up their time to do pro bono work, which, convincing lawyers to do work for free is not always the easiest thing to do. For some it is, for some it isn't, but I had to go to legal communities throughout the entire province and try to convince folks of the importance of doing pro bono work. So did some outreach stakeholder engagement with a very specific group of people for several years prior to politics. But it was that advocacy work and the gaps that I saw in the justice system that got me involved in provincial politics, really. And that's how I ended up here since then. And what I would want to make sure that you were aware, I would say I have not become an expert in anything, and anything that I'm about to talk to you about, I would not profess to be the best at any of this, but I have had some experience. Some has been productive, some otherwise, and I'm just happy to share my experience with you in the hopes that it can help you in the work that you're doing. So take everything that I say now with a grain of salt, but I hope that some of it will be of interest and useful to you in the work that you do. I do know that over the last 10 years and then the 5 years prior to that, the most important thing in the work that I've done, and I always say this to people who are interested in pursuing politics as a career, that the most important skill set you need to have is building relationships. That's really 100% of what the job is building relationships and meeting community where they're at, communications, but it's not necessarily the side of communications that you would initially think a politician should have. But when you think about it, it is the most important. Is not necessarily the ability to give speeches, but the ability to listen to people and actually generate from what they're telling you, what their concerns are, where their deeper needs are, and then being capable of advocating for those issues and for those concerns to another audience, whether that's with government and your counterparts in government, if you're like me and in the opposition, or with your cabinet team, if you're either in cabinet, you're in government, or with your colleagues, if you're on the government side of caucus. But really, all of that is very difficult to do if you haven't developed and perfected the skill set of building relationships. So when I say that, I don't just mean relationship building in the community, and we'll talk a little bit about that next, but also relationship building with colleagues. And I think that's a very important piece of it as well. If you want to get anything done in the work that I've done prior to politics and the work that I've done currently, without having that relationship and that level of trust and mutual respect built with both your colleagues that are on your side or your team, I suppose, but also the folks on the other side, it's very, very difficult to be successful in advocating for your issues and the needs of the people that you're talking to. So Bonnie had asked me to give some information to you about, or some advice on how to connect with stakeholders, or connecting with how we're connecting with, well, specifically toward rural Saskatchewan. But I do think more broadly, this can apply to a lot of different places. I know for us, I don't think I'm giving away any state secrets to know that it has been a lot of years since my party, I'm with the Sask NDP, has represented an area in rural Saskatchewan. And because of the amount of MLAs that we have had prior to this last election in October, it has been very difficult for us to be able to be out in community in areas where we're not the MLA for a very long time. And when you're not present, I think it is much easier for there to be stories about who you are and what you represent. And if you're not there to counteract it, that's very difficult to deal with. So I guess my first most basic piece of advice when connecting with stakeholders in areas that wouldn't be considered or on issues that would be considered your home turf, it's just for showing up. That sounds so basic, but sometimes that's the hardest part, is just showing up. For us, that means making sure that we're flagging community events, something as big as a rodeo or a parade, or as small as a community barbecue. In addition to booking meetings with community leadership. So it's also important for us to meet with the mayor and city council, but we also need to be physically there in the community at events where your average citizen is going. You know, it's great to have a photo op with mayor and council, but if you're not actually making that impact and meeting people and hearing from them, if you're not also physically in the community as well. And that really goes to two other points that I have, which is I called it "Don't be a helicopter," which for me means don't be a fly-in politician, or for you a fly-in engager of the community, where you're coming in just for one quick meeting and taking off and thinking that you've covered that area of the province. I've covered that town. I know all their issues, and I don't ever have to come back here again for another 2 years. It's about actually physically being there, whether that's engaging in, like I said, going to parades and community barbecues, going to businesses, talking to businesses. One big thing for us is Coffee Row. There's not a lot of communities in the province that doesn't have a local coffee shop like a Tim Hortons or an A&W, where community folks are gathering. I think about the Hamley gas station. Actually, they have a couple tables in the back by the bathrooms where you can find folks there almost every day having coffee and chatting, and you can gain a lot of insight by just going over there and introducing yourself. So there's box checking and community engagement, and then there's real community engagement. And checking those boxes, meeting with mayor and council, for example, are really important. It's not all of it. Another example I have is of it going wrong is it was a story that was relayed to me by a northern community, and it's about folks who were, I guess, literal helicopters in the community, where they were going to the northern community to gather feedback and consultation on the state of the highways around their community, but they didn't actually drive into the community. They flew in, and I'll tell you, community knew that. I mean, word travels really fast, and people did not take that very well, that you were going to do community consultation on the state of highways, and you didn't even want to drive in on the highways that you're supposed to be looking at. Like that's a pretty big mess up, in my opinion. But sometimes you can make those mistakes without actually taking the time to think through all of the steps that you're doing when you're engaging with a specific community. So taking that time, just making sure that, am I approaching this the right way? Am I talking to the right people? Have I been thoughtful in the way that I've gone into the community is really important. It's also important that you don't make any assumptions about a community. Just because you're going into one particular area or talking about one particular group, you shouldn't assume that you know number one, what that community needs, and number two, what that community is going to think about you or the work that you're doing. I think always going in with a blank slate, always going in willing to listen and willing to learn is incredibly important, because people we're intuitive as human beings. We pick up on vibes more than anything, and they will pick up on your vibes if you're closed off or if you're making assumptions about them. Actually, people are pretty in particular astute when it comes to picking up assumptions that people are making about themselves, other people are making about themselves. On that piece, it's also really important, and that's something that's a particularly important for the work that I do, is to meet folks where they're at. So when you're going into a community and you're talking to them about a specific issue or on a specific topic, it's really important on the advice of listening more and talking less, which I think is the most important advice you can ever receive. The always oft quoted statement that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. is particularly apt when doing community engagement. You may think that people are there because they want to hear a politician give a speech, or you've got an opinion on a particular issue and a kind of an idea of where it's going. So you want to make sure that you're conveying that. And there is a piece or a space for that and a time for that for sure. But the vast majority of the work is listening and again, meeting folks where they're at. It's not about arguing with somebody or explaining to them why they're wrong. There might be a piece of that, but you're not there necessarily. And I'm speaking for myself as a politician in particular, not necessarily going to go there to explain to everybody why they're wrong and I'm right. And if only I just explained it better, or they just listened to me, then, you know, they would see the error of their ways. That's fundamentally the wrong way to approach anything. And it doesn't serve your purpose of either trying to get your issue, move your issue forward, or to get better information about what is going on in the community that you're talking to. But that is something that I think it sounds simple, but I think is a very commonly done symptom of being in the work that I'm in, and doing the amount of community engagement that I do in my work. I often see folks in the political world who feel that if only we just went there and explained better, then it would be a different situation for us, or that folks would see the error of their ways, which is incredibly flawed and very paternalistic and a very inappropriate way to think of community and community engagement. You'll always be shocked by the conversations you have. I'm always shocked by the conversations I have, and I'm always humbled by the level of expertise that everybody has in particular areas of their lives. Everybody has an area that they know better than you, and that leads to really what I would consider my little last bit of advice for connecting with stakeholders is always be humble. Don't ever assume that you know more than the person that you're talking to, and be ready to eat some crow, frankly. That's a part of humility. Folks may be coming to you, and this might be particular to me in the work that I do, but people might be coming to you and they might have an issue they want to bring forward. They might be upset with you for something, either that's something that you've done or something that you've had no responsibility in doing. But your job is to, like I said, listen more, talk less, lead with humility, meet people where they're at. And a lot of that is hearing people out, listening to what they have to say, and showing some humility. And frankly, that goes a long way than anything else. People respect people who show up more than anything. And this, the fact that you showed up, that you're willing to listen and that you're willing to learn is massive in terms of community engagement and building relationships in areas where you wouldn't consider your home base, or an area that you feel most comfortable in. Word travels fast too. So first impressions are very important. And if you lead with those sorts of things at the forefront, it will help you in the long run, because like I said, word gets around. A negative experience can make it more difficult for you to be able to do your work in that area for quite a long time. The other piece I wanted to talk about is sort of the converse, more geared toward what I think the work is that much of the work of what you folks do, which is bringing your ideas and your research to political leadership, or folks who are decision makers, folks who are able to make policy, and how any tips that I may have in terms of how to do that effectively. My first one would be to be respectful of the time of those leaders who you're reaching out to. Not that they're not grateful to hear from you, but know that there are lots of people reaching out on their particular issue every single day. And for that person, for each of those people, their issue is the most important issue. So, I'll have like 4 stakeholder meetings today. Everyone will have something different that they're advocating for. And for each of those 4 people, their issue is the most important issue, because that's the issue that you've been working on and that you're passionate about. That was my world prior to politics too. I mean, access to justice is my passion baby, and it was my most important issue. It still is my most important issue. As in light of that, I always say, if you're providing documents to leadership or research papers, I am a huge fan of the executive summary and summarizing, distilling down the findings that you've had. I am not smart enough to read graphs and data and that sort of thing, so it's always easier for me to pick out the issues within a research project that is pertinent if I have an executive summary to go back to be able to point as to where, like, okay, this is the key thing, and then I can, if I want to learn a little bit more about this other key thing, then I can find what page it's at and distill that into more detail. I've heard of multiple stories. I know for sure this used to happen in years past, in governments past. I don't know if this is the case of the day in today's government, but it used to be a rule that if you were going to bring something, if you were a cabinet minister or like a deputy minister, for example, if you were going to bring an issue to cabinet, like a decision item to cabinet, it could not be more than 3 pages in length. So think about all of the different issues that cabinet has to discuss and how complex some of those issues are. There have been political leaders, premiers in the past, who have rejected anything that is not distilled in 3 pages. There's nothing that can't be distilled in 3 pages. I know that sounds difficult, but it's true. If there's more information that you need to get, then you can always find it. But if you're not able to distill what your issue is and what the solution is in that length of time, then more work needs to be done on it, frankly. And that's just a reality of I think it's twofold. I think it's the reality of the timelines leadership has to work with and the many different issues that they have to solve. There is a myriad, as you can think of, like there's highways, like we already mentioned, there's healthcare, there's policing, there's a million things that a cabinet will have to discuss in a single day. They're not going to be able to go in deep dive into every single one of those topics. But frankly, if you can't distill something into 3 pages, then you may not have the full grasp on what the issue is and what the solution is either, as somebody who is perhaps pitching policy or pitching ideas. And that's something that I know well from my work in law. If we were doing written materials to the court, there is length limits for how many pages a brief should be, for example. We have limitations as to how long our oral advocacy can be in terms of timelines, how long we can speak for. And if we're not capable of distilling a complex issue down into something that can be digestible, even for judges, then I haven't given enough thought to what the issue is yet. So it's tough, but it's I think it's a really good and challenging exercise. On that too, we have many people who come to us with many different problems and many different challenges. I always ask them, what are the 2 things or 1 thing you would like to see done today that could help address your issue? So when you're bringing problems to decision makers, make sure you're also bringing solutions as well. And those solutions need to be tailored to the limitations of the decision makers. So for example, if you're coming to an opposition legislator, and there's a problem that you want solved, we can't introduce legislation that costs the government money. So if you're coming to me with a bill proposal that is going to cause the government to have to invest any money, even $1, I can't put it forward as a private member's bill. There's other things I can do, but just make sure you have a good idea of who you're going to and who you're talking to and what the limitations are that they have, the constraints that they're faced with, and make sure that you're tailoring your ask to suit that particular individual. On that in particular, as well, if you are talking to political leadership, I do always recommend, if you're pitching something to government, that you also pitch it to the opposition. That can be done in a myriad of ways. We have shadow ministers for every ministry, and it's very helpful for us to know what things are being pitched to the minister. We don't have access to ministries. Even, for example, I'm the Shadow Minister of Justice. I can't call up the deputy minister. I don't get any correspondence that the ministry has. I don't have any access to the ministry and what they are aware of, unless the stakeholders who are advocating with the ministry are also advocating with me. So in your correspondence with the ministry, I always encourage, or government, I always encourage you to folks to reach out to opposition as well. And know that we, at least in the opposition that I'm a part of, we're very discreet in the way that we talk to stakeholders and folks who come from the community with their ideas, that we will never, unless we are actively told to, go out in community or go out to the minister and say, or go out in front of a microphone and say, so-and-so said that we should be doing this and they're mad that we're not doing this. We are very good at receiving information and being very confidential in that. So another example, we have a thing called lobby groups who come into the legislature during session, and there'll be groups of stakeholders who will meet with government, and then we'll meet with opposition in that same day. And unless we're actively told to by the stakeholder, we will never bring that conversation to question period. Say, so-and-so advocated for this, but you aren't doing that. So why aren't you doing that? So if you're worried, I know some people have a fear of reaching out to opposition in the worry that if you're building up a strong relationship with government, you don't necessarily want your information to be used and weaponized as an attack against government, because that will hurt your relationship with government. But that's something that we very much understand and respect. Our job is to advocate for your issue. And if advocating for your issue, the best way to advocate for your issue is to not do anything and just take in the information, that's something we're very used to doing. So don't feel afraid to reach out to opposition if you are advocating on an issue with government. Another thing in particular tied to politics and moving the dial and getting your issue acted on is to ensure that you are either connecting your particular issue, your passion project, to something topical or to the constituents that they represent. On top of that, I always say to folks that if you want to move the dial in terms of getting action from government in particular, ensure that you're building and then bringing with you a network of supporters for your cause. So this might be an issue or an idea that you feel very passionate about, but as politics goes, we need to have a groundswell of folks, for the most part, to be able to get government to be able to turn their attention to whatever that issue is to make something happen. An example of that would be, I've had someone come to me or to our caucus, for example, who was advocating for for something in the disability sector. There was something that this individual felt was unfair, and that folks with disabilities were being treated unfairly. And he was very passionate about it. It was something that we saw was important, very important to this person, but also something that could be considered, you know, there will be folks on both sides of this issue, folks who are supportive of what this person is advocating for, and folks who are not. So we sent him, we gave him some ideas and some tools for building a network and a base of supporters, whether that's, for him, it was gathering petitions and creating a letter writing campaign, but he was able to build up a groundswell of support, which turned government's attention to the issue. So we helped him amplify his voice to government, but government wasn't going to move on this issue with it being a bit not controversial, but with there being people on both sides of the issue, until they could see that there was a groundswell of support with this individual to have this issue be addressed. So sometimes that's a piece that we often forget, is that we are a democracy. The best way to get things done is to build up popular support within the democracy. And that is, that goes back again to community engagement. It's like a full circle conversation, but it does go back again to community engagement and reaching out and meeting people where they're at. But all of that will help to be able to turn government's slow, and like I said, a million different issues that they're trying to look at in any given day, but turn their attention to something and build up that level of support to be able to get an issue across. I think I'm at about 40 minutes of me just blabbing on. So that was about the advice I could think of ways that I have experienced that are the best ways for connecting with stakeholders, and in particular in communities where we haven't been around often, where we have where we would consider our home base necessarily at this time, and then also how community and how folks with ideas and folks with research can best connect with political leaders. So I hope some of that was helpful. I hope you can pick up some tidbits of advice there. Like I said, I am available whenever, but outside of this conversation, but I'm also happy to take questions if there are any today.
That was fantastic, Nicole. Thank you. I think the one thing that'll stick with me is the importance of plain language. Plain language, by definition, is using the language that is most appropriate for your audience, and not the 82-page data-laden research material that you've spent, the last 3 years collecting, but distilling it and making it understandable in whatever format your audience will accept and have that land in the way that you want it to land. You can always include your research report, but that executive summary piece, that is something that is, it's an art form. It takes a long time to develop those skills. And we've held sessions on plain language here before at KM in the AM. And it is something that's hard to do. It's harder to write short than it is to write long, right? And but government folks are busy, and ultimately, I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but before you see it as the policymaker or as the minister, it's the bureaucrats below you that are supporting your work. They're the ones that you need to get this passed before it gets to the minister. So knowing who those folks are in the ministries most appropriate to your research is really important. And those can change. So staying current and making those connections in the bureaucracy before even you go to the minister, I think that's where most folks will find that getting their knowledge shared with the minister, that's where they're going. That's the sweet spot, right? It's by, connecting with those folks. And yes, I'll send Nicole's email out with our wrap-up email. That'll come in the next couple of days. And so that you guys have all the information you need to connect with her. Nicole's been around the block once or twice in this role now. So she's very knowledgeable and is more than willing to help you get your research moved to the next level. And whether that's, in policy or not. A couple of weeks ago, I attended a week-long symposium with the NEAR network, and it was meant to teach students, so people, PhD and master's students, at the beginning of their careers, how to do this community engagement piece. And Nicole, you actually mentioned most of what you taught the students over the course of that week. So it was very interesting to see. I think a lot of times our policymakers kind of forget that this knowledge is being worked on, right? That there's a lot of resources available. And ultimately, it's up to the researchers themselves to get that research into the hands that can most affect positive change in the community, because researchers don't research just for the good of their health. They're doing it because they have a passion about something, like yours with the law. But you, as coming from a lawyer background, aren't necessarily going to be able to understand something coming from, say, cancer research or from the other hard sciences. I mean, the synchrotron is huge, but how many of us really know what it's all about? Without, people like Greg Baskey, who is the communications person over there, we really wouldn't understand what's going on. So, and that's what I mean by plain language. We have to get our data heavy and, genre specific knowledge into the language that, someone like Nicole will understand. I'm wondering if any of the rest of you have any examples, either successful or unsuccessfully getting your research into the hands of those who actually need it, whether that's at the community level, policy level, or, in any other way. If you want to pop that in the chat or unmute yourself, you can join in whenever you feel that's going to be, and then we can continue the conversation. If there is no questions, let me know that, and then we can let Nicole go to prepare for her day of meetings that she mentioned. I'm wondering, Nicole, you did mention one, like the highways example. I'm wondering if you have any other examples that maybe were, like really successful. I know that the NDP has tried to make inroads into rural Saskatchewan over the course of, the past few years. And I'm wondering if there's anything that you guys are doing that's helping you reach those goals, other than, like Coffee Row is a really good example where there's not very many people. Those voters are the ones who will either, make the decision or not to, whoever is going to lead them into the next election. I wonder if you have any examples there that maybe are helping you guys make those inroads.
Yeah, thanks. It's really mostly what I was speaking about, that being present is the most important thing, and actually just showing up has been really helpful for us in terms of making inroads. I think sometimes it takes multiple visits to a community before people will feel comfortable opening up to you and will trust you as somebody who's not just coming in once every 4 years looking for a vote, for example. So now that we have, I had kind of briefly mentioned this, but we were a much smaller opposition prior to this last election. Now that we have 27 members of opposition, we have pretty much every seat in the major cities. We have the capacity to physically be present in communities that we haven't been able to be present in for 20 years. So so now we have the capacity to be at those community barbecues and those other community events in a more regular way than we ever could since I was elected. And that I can already see it in the communities that I've been in, where I either wasn't able to be in the past, or I was in very rarely. So I wasn't really making connections or building relationships in a way that I am now. I'm already seeing, because I've been more of a regular face in some of these communities, I know my colleagues have done the same, already seeing more people open up and more people feel comfortable talking to us and saying, I haven't seen a politician in this town for X number of years, and you actually don't seem too bad. You're not kind of what I thought you would be like. And that's already getting people to open up more. It sounds so simple, because it is, but just because something is simple doesn't mean that it's easy, and it does take time. But that is I can already see it paying off for us.
Oh, that's good news. Yeah, the simple things are sometimes the hardest things to make happen. Like in your case, you need the time, you need the resources to be able to get into those communities, not by plane, but by driving.
Exactly. Sometimes you need a plane, but don't go in by plane if you're going to talk about the state of the roads.
That's right. Oh, well, this has been a wonderful conversation. Does anyone else have any questions? I noticed a few people popped in a little later. We are recording this session, and again, I'll have it up and ready to rewatch in the next couple of days. You'll receive an email in your inbox. If you're not signed up to KM in the AM, please sign up. That's the main way we send out information, is by email, through our email newsletter. And that will land in your inbox shortly. Yeah, so again, thank you, Nicole. This has been enlightening. I've learned a lot, and I know our members have also learned a lot. So thank you so much for agreeing to join us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Right. Okay, well, I'm going to let everybody get back to their day. And good luck with your meetings today, Nicole. And when we make it to Regina in the next month or two, I'm calling you up and we're going to go have a coffee. Okay, have a great day, everybody.